And welcome back to another Perspectives chat. And as always, I talk about things which just fall across my radar, and nothing kind of overly prepared, just talking through some thoughts. And on this occasion, my radar thoughts were given a nudge by someone who left a comment in one of my previous YouTube videos, Perspectives. I think it was the Hijacking Consciousness video. And this person mentioned in their comments if I was aware of the meme or concept that's being discussed at the moment about reincarnation, and the idea that there's a reincarnation trap, that people are being told by certain spiritual teachers that you shouldn't go towards the light because that's a trap to get you back into reincarnation, and whether I had anything to say about it. I appreciate that. I appreciate all comments, and I'm happy to receive ideas or nudges or questions, because it then gets on my radar and I have something to bring to the chat. So, saying that, if any of you kind viewers have anything that's on your mind and would like to share it or ask me to pass it on my radar, then please do. Just wanted to mention that. So to answer that question, yes, I am aware of this concept, which I think I would call the reincarnation trap. And I think there's something problematic about it, because the question is, how can we really know for sure? That's one thing. And when you start to discuss ideas that it's very, very difficult to self-verify, then there's a very kind of, you start to get into a kind of vague area, and you need to kind of then take on trust or take on faith the understanding of other people. And so there's going to be very, very few people, I would say, that actually have verifiable experiential knowledge and understanding of the reincarnation cycle, because it means really having to have gone through it or being able to perceive what happens after death by actually leaving the body. So when you get online so-called spiritual teachers talking about this, you have to wonder how verifiable is their own experiential knowledge and perception of this event, because it's quite serious, this concept. And the idea, from what I understand, is that instead of being liberated from this physical incarnation and this cycle of life, you get, by going towards the light, it's supposed to be a trap to get you back into this cycle of incarnation to physicality. And I mean, that ties in with the notion of reincarnation, which is a long-held belief as well. But also it ties into other notions, darker notions, perhaps that some people are relating it to this concept of the eighth sphere, which Rudolf Steiner brought up 100 years ago. And there has been talk that perhaps there are some darker elements which are taking energy from the vital spirit of humanity, or souls, or the spirit of people, that by getting them to reincarnate, you're keeping them in this physical cycle trap, or this trap of the simulation. And not only are you keeping them within the game, within the gameplay, but at some moment you can actually, during the death rebirth cycle, you can siphon off some energy from that vital spirit. So there's been talk about that. And I even know that, I mean, I'm aware of David Icke also, his latest book called The Trap, where he actually does say that his understanding is that this is a reincarnation trap to keep the spirit, or the human spirit, in the simulation, in the game, and so we don't have an exit door. So really the simulation trap is can be said to what I mentioned before about false exits. You think you're leaving the game, but it's a revolving door to come back in. So that's what's been discussed. But let's look at this from a broader perspective. I mean, reincarnation has been a religious theme for centuries and millennia. The idea, especially some of the Eastern religious spiritual traditions. I know that Buddhism, Hinduism, Sikhism, and those elements have the term of moksha. Moksha is this kind of it's like you say, repeated lives, where in your lives you're trying to perhaps live out your karma and also find enlightenment or emancipation from this cycle, this freedom from samsara, the idea of the cycle of death and rebirth and repeated incarnations. You want to be released from that. So there is this notion that we're going round and round in this cycle. But I think one of the major aspects which is a blockage to any understanding of this, and especially in Western cultures, is that in Western society and Western culture, we don't have a very perceptive understanding of what death signifies. And death is often seen as an ultimate state, and even the word death seems to have this connotation of that's it, blackness, the void, the end of everything, a negation, a denial of life. And so that's why we fear death throughout our lives, or we're programmed to have this fear of death and this denial of death. And that's why, another thing we could talk about, but that's why it seems like there's a certain kind of, the transhumanist pathway is try to escape death, and a lot of rich elites are always trying to reach immortality and escape death because there's this denial of death. And it's this kind of void end point. And even in our lives, we don't like to talk about death. We find it uncomfortable. We put dying people into residence homes. We want to shun them, ignore them. We don't like to see the faces of dying people. It makes us uncomfortable. We don't like to visit dying people. Death has a very dark, negative fear factor in Western society especially. And so we don't tend to realize that death and life are just two sides of the same aspect. When we're living, we're also dying. When our cells and our bodily cellular structure is regenerating itself. It's regenerating itself because parts of our cellular structure is dying constantly. It needs this regeneration. So there's parts of the human body which are dying at the same time as being regenerated. So birth and death are kind of intermingled aspects of the same process. There is no life without death. So death is not a finality, and it's a kind of transitioning point, or a return, or a continuation. So you can have, maybe rebirth is a better way of phrasing death. So and interestingly, moksha, that phrase in the Eastern phrase about the reincarnation of the body, the liberation from the cycle of death and rebirth, in a psychological sense, it also signifies a type of freedom from ignorance, a self-realization, a self-knowledge. And I think this is the crucial aspect, because if we're unable to kind of have a perceptual freedom and expand our perception of what death means, then we're not able to really understand this reincarnation. We can't really talk about reincarnation or the reincarnation trap because we're speaking from a place of limited perception. So for me, rather than talking about, does a reincarnation trap exist, perhaps we should put the focus on what does that imply for our life, our living aspect. And if we can understand that life itself is a kind of, we go through states and stations in life. We go through states of experiential understanding, states of greater awareness and self-knowledge, and we have, you can call life a journey of states and stations. And so what we take with us through that journey of experiential states of our own self-understanding, that is what we can take with us when we pass the threshold of the leaving the physical body behind. And it's that which can then help us understand and be prepared of how to move onwards. So we could say then that the reincarnation moment is going to be a greater moment for those who have greater ignorance, because they didn't prepare or they didn't reach states of self-realization in life. So I would say then that you see how difficult it is to speak on this subject. So to kind of recap, it's very hard to verify what's going to happen after we leave the physical body. And some so-called teachers or some people may say, this is my understanding, you're in a trap, don't follow the light. But how are you really going to know to follow the light or not? You can't just say, someone told me in this life not to follow the light, so when I get there I won't. Because at that moment you're going to have to trust something inside you. Something inside your spirit, because your body won't be there, of course. You're going to have something inside you which you're going to follow. Some sense, some innate understanding and knowledge. So the only way we can have trust in that inner knowledge is to start to have trust and understanding in our state, our knowledge, our self-knowledge right now in life. So the more understanding, perceptual awareness that we can gain in this life, that will be able to give us the knowledge to know what to do when we leave our body. So rather than fearing this reincarnation cycle, rather than worrying that we're going to have to, be trapped into the simulation, we can, as an antidote to that, we can gain the self-knowledge, the self-wisdom in this life. So when we get to that stage of transition, we'll have the wisdom to self-navigate ourselves. So that's why I find the subject problematic, because it's so easy to take on trust or to take on blind trust. Oh, so many people are talking about life as a reincarnation trap into the simulation. I'm either going to A, follow the light, or B, not follow the light. And that, in a way, if you make that decision now, then you can block yourself from doing further work on yourself, further inner preparation. Maybe the questions could be saying, when I leave my body, there's going to be a point that I have to deal with. There's going to have to be a moment where I trust myself to make a decision. and therefore I'm going to gain as many resources, as much inner understanding and self-knowledge as possible in this life, so when I reach that threshold I will have the best potential to make the right way forward. So I think that the work starts now, in this life, so we're able to navigate ourselves when we leave the body. And we shouldn't think of death as something fearful, but we are always preparing for death in life. And having the continual recognition that we are living within the aspect of death, and that moment's going to come to us, then it's not so problematic. Pain is more problematic than death, I would say. So those are my thoughts on the subject. Maybe, I say, very difficult to kind of put it down into a box, but I hope that I've been able to express something in what I wanted to say, in that we should be careful of a dissolution of meaning in our lives. Death is not the end. We should understand that living the small moments in life can give the meaning, to give us the understanding to move through this transitional stage which we call death. And why should we worry if there's a reincarnation trap? Because the more we do now, the more that we'll have the self-knowledge to deal with that moment when we arrive to it. So I say thank you for that person for giving me the nudge to talk about it. And well, cheers for now. Stay well, stay healthy, stay sane.